Okay, so this is an update from the last video, and I want to show you a number of things that have improved from the last one. So I'm going to cover a number of fixes, point out a couple of issues I'm still currently experiencing, and finish off with a projection of where this is going to go. So in the last video, I pointed out that there's a graph below that's supposed to be showing the predictions, and it wasn't showing anything, so the graph didn't display anything. And I was looking at the Ajax request, it was coming up empty, and after a little bit of peeking into the code, I figured out what the issue was. So the code itself was set to look for the user, which would work okay if you hadn't logged in, which was primarily how I was running it from the local version. But once I went online, I was actually now logged in. So now that meant it was trying to look for data linked to my user account, and there was none. So it's getting back no results. So basically now disable that feature for now until later on in the future, where I plan to implement a user-based trading system. So you can consider the current system right now as basically a whole site based, so you don't have to log in, and basically work the same. Now additionally, you can see that there's the top graph, which is supposed to show the price, and that shows about the last 30 items, and below it now you get the profit and loss chart, and the duration in between prediction. So right now I've set it at 60 seconds, so 1 minute in between every prediction. So that's what I'm working with right now. And on the chart below, you'll see the profit and loss chart. So basically how the value fluctuates as you either buy and sell stocks, and the total price of what now you'll have at the end. So that's how it looks right now. And I'm using Plotly.js, which is a framework for plotting graphs. In this case, just using it for the line graph. And as you can tell from now, from the right top corner, that the graph basically updated on single additional value. Well, now that's how it's supposed to be working, but additionally there's a few bugs that are cropping up. For example, in this case, the top graph, which is only supposed to show the last 30 items, when it gets a new additional item, it stops showing the last 30. It was supposed to have a sliding feature, but this now started working, but after continued updates, it now became buggy and went on and off. So first thing that I did was, for the lower chart, I switched to showing all the items, which now has a particular disadvantage where the dates are now pointing downwards, which now makes it pretty hard to read. So if possible, I'd like to reduce it to only 30 items. In that case, they're only slightly slanted towards downwards, and becomes much easier to read. So the plan is to have this fixed, and I believe that basically there's a high chance that this can be resolved in a week or so. But also there's plenty of plotting softwares that are available for the browser, so if this becomes too complex, I'll consider if there's a simpler solution provided by a different provider. So additionally, another thing that I've added is the ability to show the difference between up, down, and equal. So the arrow that's pointing down says the price will go down, equal shows that the price is going to stay equal, and pointing up says the price is going to move up. That's the prediction for the next item. And as you can see, I have to continually scroll up just to show this data and the price, how it fluctuates. So if you consider the best move of how to make the best of predictions, what you usually do is to try and find what would be the peak and the trough of a time period. So the peak will be the most highest point and the trough will be the lowest point. So the idea would be, if you can predict where the peak is, or let's say you can assume based on your predictions that this is the peak, the idea would now be selling. And then you sell either a certain amount or all the stocks that you have, wait for the trough, and at the trough moment, that's when you now consider buying at the lowest point, wait for it to go up, and so on. That's probably the best way to move with this. Another option is options. It's also the maiden name for this is called options, which is just, instead of buying stocks, you predict where the price will be within a range. So the highest price and the lowest price between a certain particular amount of time, let's say a week, and then you bet a certain amount of money that the price will not deviate between these two. So if your prediction stays correct, you win a certain amount on top of the money that you bet. If it fails, the amount of money that you bet, you lose. So it's a bit like you can consider the way people usually bet on football matches. It's a lot similar to that. So you bet that, let's say, Manchester United will defeat Arsenal in the next match. You bet a certain amount. If you win, the odds are like 2-1. So you may get double the amount, or you may lose the amount that you bet on. So that's options. It's less stable than stocks, because stocks basically, even if the price fluctuates, well, whatever the price is worth is what you'll have remaining. And it's rarely, unless a company goes defunct, you'd lose your stock. So technically you will still be able to salvage a certain amount, whereas options, any amount that you spend goes away. So the rewards are higher, but the risks are also equivalently higher. So that's one thing to consider if you are to go the options way. And additionally, if you're going the options way, it will be pertinent to know whether how options work. Is it something that a company offers? So in this case, a trading company that offers you the ability to buy and sell stocks on their platform. Are they the people who provide the betting price for your stock options, or is it based on the company itself? So if it's based on the company itself, this becomes far much easier for possibly me to figure out how the calculations comes from. But if it's based on the stock trading company, in this case, to try and stay true to the range or the behavior that they have, it's either to try and see the logic of how they functionally try and calculate the price on that you spent on and your profit level, because more or less there's usually a function that says based on prior data and this variable and that variable and the amount that you are betting on, we're willing to add an additional profit of this much. If you win, you get the whole amount. If you lose, you get the amount that you spent on. So that's that. And from what I've seen from tutorials on how stock trading works, especially for options, if let's say you bet $500 and there's additional things that they usually add called ceilings. So ceilings is try to prevent you from losing everything that you had. So you can go from basically, let's say, winning $500, you bet $500 to winning $700. That's with a ceiling, so that protects you losing the whole amount that you spent on. So the logic of a ceiling is to, you basically at the end of the day not go out of it with zero. So you'll get something at the end of the day, similar to how you buy stocks. So even if your first prediction fails, there's another prediction which basically caps both ends, so the highest and the lowest, and based on that, that's how you determine this. So now back to this, you have the last price and the current price. So you can review this from the page, and you have the stocks bought, the cash remaining, which is the amount of money you had, the remaining amount, the action taken, which will vary. In this case, you can show, for example, stocks bought, stocks sold, and none. So that depends on basically how the prediction was made and which action it took based on that prediction. So additionally, you have the last prediction, which has three values. That's -1 for down, 0 for no change, and 1 for positive, moving up. So that's usually the prediction that's going to come as an integer. And you'll have also the bottom, which is the total predictions and the accuracy of the predictions. And the total is just the total of all the predictions made, and the accuracy is now basically the ones that are correct over the total times 100, which is basically how you get a percentage. So with that, I can calculate how accurate the model is based on live data. And on the right corner here, you'll see that the data tends to fluctuate more haphazardly, where basically the peaks and troughs are less jaggedy than they are on the left, which is actually because the left side is based on simulating the full trade of prior data, whereas the one on the right, it's based on current data coming in live. So I believe the reason is that the full simulation based on the prior data doesn't go well enough compared to this. So I need to review the code and figure out, because usually the peaks and troughs should basically act the same way, but they're not. So I need to look into the specifics of how it's saving the data and figure out what's going on. And as I said, another feature that's not working and not working as expected is the dates, but that one is additionally something that I hope to fix eventually, preferably in about, let's say, a week's time. And you have the drop down field for the stock values, and the idea is to have the stock values that I currently have right now, which is about 3,000 stock values. Though the drop down list that you get here are only for the stock values that have active data. So this is based on ticking the three check boxes. So the first one would be you have prior data that will be used to train the model. You have basically now trained the model with this, and last but not least, you have gotten back some live data, a certain amount that's enough to now start propagating a live prediction, because even with one single iteration, there isn't enough history logic, because what I get back from querying the data source is a single item data. So basically the timestamp and the price. So I need to use multiple requests on this to try and find a particular pattern, which to a human eye, even possibly to me, to a large extent, isn't feasible to see the pattern. But that's not for me to find out, it's for the algorithm that's working on this to try and predict. So my part is to basically have enough data to provide it that's giving it a sense of history. So once it marks now the three check boxes, now from the drop down you'll be able to see the stock value. But still, when I make a request to ask for new stock values, I'll make sure that I get any that's available for all the stock values, and that's the idea that I have in mind. Now additionally, as you can, this is just a preview of all the fields that I expound upon based on the current data of just now the date and the price. Now based on this, you have your row of -1, 1 and 0, and using this I'll know that the price will either go up, down, or stay the same. So I've highlighted a row here with a price of 32.74 and a value of 1. So it predicts that the next value will move up, which as you can see, it's exactly what happens with 33.97, which is below 32.74. Now the same now with 33.97, the value that comes below it is 33.58, which is down. So you get a value of -1. So using this, I've created a training and some training values and the truth values to train my models. So basically using that, I have everything that I need to train a model that will now try and predict the future values. Whether the model will need to be improved on is something that time will tell, but most importantly, I have the data, and with the data, the only thing that I may now additionally need to think of is if I can include more rows of data by reworking the existing data based on the existing the beginning 2 rows of just the date and the time. So using that, hopefully, intentionally the idea is to get above 70% accuracy, and right now I'm getting about 50% accuracy, although it fluctuates. Sometimes it reaches 70, 60, so that's roughly the range that it fluctuates over time. And realistically, that's good enough, because if I was to consider zeros, which is no change, do tend to happen rarely, but they do occur. So let's say roughly, if I assume zeros take up about 15%, with the remaining 18% equally distributed for ups and down, which is rarely the case, but let's assume that's the case. So with that in mind, a model that's hitting 50% is above a model that's just guessing randomly. So it means that it is actually, in a way, learning something, and in a way using what it's learned to make predictions. So that's what I have currently right now. Entertaining the idea of having ways of now intentionally trying to increase the accuracy by checking the accuracy over time. So if it in between making requests, the accuracy drops to a certain point, it retrains itself automatically. So that's probably one thing that I'll implement. Whether or not I'll move with that direction or using a different model or working with different rows, as I say, time will tell. So just to emphasize on this comes from something that is particularly very popular when it comes to machine learning, since this field of data science, people are just trying to find useful models that can be applied in day-to-day life. So in this case, it's trying to design a model that can predict stock values, and arguably some people do say that there are models that are used to trade without human input, though that's debatable, because at the end of the day, there are people who profess that they are stock traders. So if the field was automated the same way that the car manufacturing field is, then you would have heard stories of stock traders losing their jobs in the dozens, as companies that do stock trading laid them off to replace them with, well, code. Well, this hasn't been said in the news, or I haven't heard any source that professes to this. So I'm more likely to lean towards the idea that they are using it more as a crutch, in the sense that they preferably, instead of, well, if you consider what a crutch is useful for, is to prevent you from falling in the way that you may have a broken leg and you're walking with a, well, with a disability. So the broken leg will be a concept to say, like how stock trading is walking in the dark. So you never know what happens, well, what's about to happen in the next few moments to come. So the bot in this case would just be used as a crutch to forewarn that, let's say, the stock value might drop suddenly, or they might move up soon. So as a sign to, let's say, the stock trader needs to consider whether they need to buy more or sell more, or just more likely be at alert, so that as soon as they see something that's out of the ordinary, they can react in time. That's more likely their use case scenario. And in my use case, I'm trying to find a project to do that's interesting. So it's more challenging. Within reason, the better. So this is within reason. The code isn't small. It's a bit of a tricky thing to actually implement it on the front end. And I'm working with a front end source to provide the data that can only allow me to query one item at a time. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but basically the logic is going over 3,000 items, each one roughly taking about 2 seconds to do this. So let's say that's considering the 2 requests and the back requests taking about half a second, then a second to save the data. That's 60,000 or 6,000 seconds in total. Divided by 60, you get 100 minutes. So that's about 1.5 hours. That's an estimate, but it actually takes about 20 minutes to run about all the stocks. So it means that I actually can't do live stock trading every minute. It about does the same thing in about every 20 minutes. And with the idea that you have the stock open and close between 9:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. New York time, that's a small window to do live testing, which is, in fairness, it's fine. And even if you went with the idea of now trying to query all the data and saving it to simulate again using that data, you basically almost take the same rate, because the to and from is what's taking too long. Now, one way to fix this is to now find a source that can allow you to query multiple stock values at the same time, which would be useful, and our avenue I'd pursue once I go down this road and taking it to the point where it's now a serious venture. Because at this point, whether the models actually will prove to be viable to use, still a question, because I still have to do a number of tests to see whether the accuracy is good enough to pursue on a real note. But more importantly, this is a source of venue for me to tinker with my skills in data science. I've debated on what to do, but instead of doing a common thing, I decided to do something that's interesting and, more importantly, might impress someone who's actually interested in the field. So that's primarily one of my ideas going down with this, and I hope to see good results hopefully within the next 2 weeks or so to come. And if that actually works out, I probably now pursue forex and cryptocurrency, because those two actually have a more yield of return and their values do change more frequently. So might be pertinent to now use stock as a training ground, then switch on to the big boys boots, and then move to stocks, from stocks to forex and crypto. More particularly crypto, because the values fluctuate more frequently there, and it's more or less determinant on the activity of the market. So I eventually will do it regardless, but the success rate of the stocks will determine how eager I am to switch to the two others, because more or less like a perfectionist, I do want to get this to the point where it's autonomous, working well enough, and basically I wouldn't switch it on in the next day and be surprised to find that the accuracy has switched from, let's say, 70 to about 10 to 15. So the limitations of the time period to test, the speed in between testing, and the complicated code that I'm working on makes the whole process a bit more slower than I hoped it will be. Though in hindsight, I knew, when based on my skills and what I'd done before, it is possible. It was debatable whether it would work to the point where it would impress. I was getting at a certain point 90% accuracy, so any real data scientist will tell you to be very skeptical of those results, and I was, in a good sense. Now, after finding out the source for that, switched to about almost again 70, about even to sometimes almost 90. So it depends on the market itself. So now with that in mind, I just want to see, using now live data, the accuracy, how that now compares to the training accuracy, and whether there are additional measures that I can additionally add to this to compensate for the fluctuations that come from the live market compared to what you'd consider historical data. These compensation methods, will it be able to keep the accuracy high as it stayed at the beginning when I trained it the first time, or is there a decay that happens over accuracy regardless of what you do? And that's an interesting thing that I want to see. And apart from this, and the small other bugs of the full simulated trading that's not graphically acting the same way as a live simulated trading, once I figure out this number of bugs and issues, I hopefully want to have in the next 2 weeks something that works, something that I can basically leave to run in the background and occasionally just come and look to see how it's performing, and who knows, maybe now switch to live data that's querying every single minute. So if that works out as intended, then this may actually now come out as a feature that I'll allow people to use as a service.